Welcome to the Chad and Chong Podcast, where we have conversations about performance, production, and everything in between. I'm Chad.
And I'm Chong.
And welcome to the show.
Episode 1. We haven't talked about this too much. We just said, let's start a podcast show, and we went for it. And
Pretty much. Yeah. I texted him.
I was on my way, I think, to some gig, or I don't know where I was going. And actually, you're right.
No, you
I
were
was
flying.
on a flight.
Yeah.
I was on a flight. And he brought up the idea of a podcast show. And I said, you know what, man, I've been wanting to do something like this for a while. I know many of you may or may not know, but I had a podcast show prior to this called Sir Kevin Says. Chad was a huge part of that. He would mix the audio for me and put the stuff together. And, so we both have somewhat experience in doing this, but it's great to have a partner in the Chad and podcast, the Chad and Chong podcast.
Yeah, and I listened to like a ton of podcasts, even before when I knew that Kev actually started one. And I think I just stumbled upon your episode with Abraham Laborio.
Yeah, that's right.
And I'm a bass player, so I'm a huge Abe fan. And so when I saw that he had an interview with him, I checked it out, but I could barely hear it. And I was like, I'm pretty sure he's like saying a lot of great things.
Yeah.
So I actually reached out and I was like, hey man, I think what you're doing is awesome. And to be honest, like I just want to hear what he has to say. So let me help you out. And from there, like, we just kind of help each other out with the podcast. And it's been a lot of fun. And I was like, you know what? I think, since we've been hanging out a lot more and things like that, I said, I feel like we have pretty good conversations.
We do, yeah.
Why not turn it into like a podcast?
Yeah.
And here we are.
Here we are. Episode 1, super stoked. A little bit about Chad, if you want to tell the audience, man, what you've done in your career, like who you are.
So I'm Chad. I'm a musician, producer, professional sound engineer. I actually started off piano lessons like when I was 10. And eventually quit. And of course, as you get older, you regret that. I play multiple instruments. I moved on to drums, guitar. I actually did trumpet in like 5th grade. And then I kind of found myself primarily as a bassist. And so I traveled. I played with a lot of independent artists, both in the Christian and secular scene. And I've been doing that for, over a decade now. And then somewhere along the line, I realized, we as musicians don't sound good, or we wouldn't, what we do wouldn't matter if the sound wasn't right.
Yeah.
And so I kind of got an interest in that, in live sound, and kind of dabbled around and, wow, what do all these buttons do? And eventually I went to the LA recording school where I learned more about like studio engineering.
Yeah.
And so recently, I'd say, during COVID or right when COVID happened, I really kind of transitioned more into the studio and actually got my own studio here in LA, which is where we're recording this.
Yeah.
So then I've been doing a lot more studio production and kind of dabbling back into live sound. So that's kind of a little bit about me. Who's Chong? And is Chong your name?
Yeah, Chong is my last name. My full name is Kevin Michael Chong, right? We thought it to be a good idea to name the show after the infamous,
Cheech and Chong.
Cheech and Chong, yeah. We're still trying to figure out some stuff logistic-wise, like, for the show as far as like artwork and things like that. And one of the individuals that I asked about, possibly creating something for us, as soon as I said, she asked me, what's the show going to be called? And I said, it's going to be called Chad and Chong. She's like, oh, like Cheech and Chong? And I was like, yeah, exactly. And she's like, also like a blunt text. And I literally thought she meant like, like an in-your-face type of text, Chad and Chong. I was just telling them, and she literally meant like a blunt. So it's kind of comedic. But a little bit about myself. I started playing drums when I was 8. I grew up in the church, Pentecostal church, out in Los Angeles, specifically a city called Southgate. I started doing drums. I had always had an interest when I was a young boy, in percussion. My dad, growing up would always have these parties, right? And he'd always have like a cowbell or, some type of percussion. So I've had an interest in music since I was a very, very young boy. And I got to doing drum lessons when I was about 8 years old. I started just doing some private stuff, and then I did that for about a year. And after that, the music school kind of shut down. They couldn't afford it anymore at the church. So I went to, at the time, YouTube was starting to come out.
Yeah.
You know, so everything that I wanted to know, I would basically search on YouTube because I didn't have an instructor anymore. You know, and then from there, just continue to play at church, and then I ended up going to school for music. You know, graduated in 2017. I got my bachelor's in drum performance.
And I was there.
Yeah, that's right.
That's your
yeah,
recital,
yeah. I think
senior recital.
Michelle, who's behind the camera, you can't see her. I
Yeah.
think, yeah, she came as well.
My lovely girlfriend.
Yeah. Thank you, Michelle. And that afforded me a lot of opportunities that I otherwise wouldn't have gotten. I love education. I love hearing intellectual conversations. I love listening to podcasts similar to what we're trying to do here, right? You know, to learn more about myself as a human being, faith, you know, just all the things that entails what it means to be a decent human, right? And so, you know, when coming up with this idea to do this show, we wanted to talk about our experiences, everything that goes into producing a show, you know, the behind the scenes stuff, conversations about where we're going to go eat after we finish rehearsing, you know, things like that.
That's important.
Yeah, as much as people might find that comedic, it's extremely important. And sometimes it's your way in, really, you know, believe it or not, to the music industry, you know? So, yeah, man.
Well, it's interesting hearing you. I totally forgot about that whole, like, your recital and the school thing. And yeah, it's kind of cool that we actually both went to school for this. And I don't know if you always planned to go to school for music, because I didn't.
Yeah.
I also went to a lot of years of college and university, trying a whole bunch of different majors until, you know, two of my friends, shout out to Jeremy and Jordan, we were both just like, one year, you know what, let's just go for it and let's just try it. And that's when we went to LA recording school.
Yeah.
And at that time, honestly, like, I thought I knew a lot about sound, but we were in an 11-month intense program where it was basically, we were in class 12 hours a day.
Wow.
And in that 11 months, like, I learned so much. And, you know, not to hate on the college or university, but I think, you know, what I learned 11 months there is definitely what I use, and, you know, what I use way more than anything that I learned in college and university. What was your experience?
When the opportunity came to go to this school, Cornell School of Music, specifically Shepherd University, I was at Chaffey College. It's a school out in Rancho Cucamonga Community College. And I really thought I was going to die there because I was taking about one course a semester,
Right.
you know, and if you know anything about community college, you have to take at least 3 to 4 classes per semester to graduate within about 2 year, 2.5 year period, right? And so I was taking my time. I wasn't really in a rush. And all of a sudden, you know, a friend of mine, dear friend, Alberto Salas, who I always, you know, give him recognition for this opportunity, because he's the one that reached out and said, hey, man, there's this opportunity to study at this school with these notable, you know, musicians and instructors, Abraham Laborio, Sr., Ormado Ruiz, Jimmy Brantley, Mauricio Guerrero, Sr., you know, a plethora of other instructors at the school. He's like, it'd be a great opportunity for you to apply and possibly win a scholarship. You know, they're handing out, you know, 3 scholarships, right? First, second, and third place. And so I remember I replied and I told him, Alberto, man, thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for thinking about me, man. But, you know, I'm pretty comfortable with, like, just playing in church, you know, and I was doing country gigs on the side and just, you know, some, you know, pop gigs and whatever. And, you know, man, it was so funny. He's like, if I saw you right now, he's like, I'd slap you right in the face, man. He's like, you need to go and try to pursue this education. He's like, it's a great opportunity and you don't know what other opportunities you might get if you get it, right? And so, you know, I was praying about it, you know, and I talked to my parents, and, you know, mostly it was just me being fearful of something new, something different, you know, and me not wanting to go out on faith and operate in that way, you know. And so anyway, you know, after countless, you know, conversations with my family, I ended up doing it. I applied, went to go audition, and I ended up winning 3rd place, you know.
Wow.
You know, and so essentially I didn't have to pay for any of my schooling. You know, I got a scholarship, which, if you know anything about music school, it's anywhere between 80 to 120 grand, you know. Yeah. And so, you know, it was a God thing, and I'm super thankful that I went and pursued it, you know. And it was difficult because, like I said, I was never really a fan of school growing up. You know, I don't know. I just never really wanted to continue my education, but this opportunity was there, and I'm so glad that I did it, you know. And it just, like, now I look back and I said, thank you, Lord, that, you know, I ended up pursuing this. Yeah, man, that the college education is crazy, but it's worth it if you know how to use it afterward, you know?
Yeah. So it's funny because you mentioned Alberto Salas, and I think probably just either this summer or last year, you actually invited me and Michelle to not your gig, but another friend's gig at this restaurant.
JD.
JD.
Yeah.
At this restaurant right here in Studio City.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because, we talked about everything in between in this podcast, and we love food. And I mean, absolutely love food. And I'm not just talking about just eating. I'm talking about specific cuisines and making sure it's got the right sauce and this and that. And I think you said it was it Argentinian food or what kind of
the
food
restaurant
was it?
itself?
Yeah, the restaurant.
Man, I think actually it's like a...
It was like a fusion.
It's like a fusion because they have burgers there. They have pizza, pasta. They have a rendition of lomo saltado, which is a Peruvian dish.
Yeah.
It's a little bit different, but they have different, inclusions of food.
Yeah. So we were actually doing another gig. We were doing like a shoot, a film shoot for something.
Oh, Vic Firth.
Yeah.
Vic Firth. That's right.
We were doing a shoot, and for me it was a long day because I was running sound for that, and it was with another buddy of ours, Richie.
Yeah.
So shout out to Ricardo.
Yeah.
But you were just like, oh yeah, there's this gig tonight. And I'm like, okay. And this was like a 10, 12-hour day for me already. And I was up super early. And then I'm gonna go, okay, yeah, I'll go. And then he goes, yeah, it's at this restaurant. And I go, well, restaurant, wow. I'm pretty hungry, even though, it's been a long day. But because he said restaurant, and, I was like, I'll go check it out.
Yeah.
So you actually lured me in with the food, but I actually brought my girlfriend again, Michelle.
Yeah.
And we did get lomo saltado, and we got something else. I forgot what it was.
Yeah.
It was really good,
Yeah.
but I got to see some Latin music.
Yeah.
Which I remember, again, we had another conversation over food where you were telling me about different rhythms.
Yeah.
And I did not even know that there were so many different rhythms in the Latin music world.
Of course.
And to see that live, I thought it was such a cool treat to see these world-class musicians who are, on tour with some of the biggest names, and also in playing behind films and things like that. Can you talk about the importance, especially being in LA, of like just the simple invite and how you don't know who you're going to run into? Because a lot of times people say, you're either one of two things. You either love networking, you're a super social person, or you hate networking because you're just introvert. But talk about like something about like food and just a simple invite to something like that, especially in a place like LA. Like, what's that importance like?
The beauty about being in LA, man, you have so many different options, especially DTLA, Hollywood. Sherman Oaks, I'm assuming, has the same kind of vibe. Really, you can't go wrong unless you go wrong. Every time I come to the studio out here, I always tell Chad, hey, there's this Peruvian spot super close. It's called Chio's. And every time we go there, we try different plates. So we got, because, he's already tried the lomo saltado, but a lot of the ends of getting into sometimes the music industry is simply over dinner. Really, that's the time that you go and you meet new people, you talk to them, you get to know them, you get to know their story, right? And you start to discover, oh, this person knows this individual. If you know anything about the music industry, it's relatively small. Mm-hmm. You're one person away from meeting that person that you want to meet. Really, it depends, like the extent of the conversations you have with individuals, right? But a lot of it is over food. If you know about good food, then you recommend those spots to those that are like, hey man, what's good around here? What should we try? My thing is always, everybody knows this about me, Peruvian food. It's the number one thing is Peruvian cuisine, some of the best food you'll ever try in the world. And so every time, I tell him, hey, Chad, let's go get some Peruvian. He's always up for it. He's always like, yeah, let's go get it, because there's so many different options. Every time you're out on the road, you got to realize you're only playing and performing an hour and a half, 2 hours at most on stage. After that, it's all the free time. Okay, well, we're going back to the lobby, going back to the hotel. What are we going to eat? What are we doing? And so I always try to look out and say, okay, I look up spots right away. As soon as I land, what's good around here? And I was out in Chicago not too long ago, and I was asking Chad for recommendations. What foodie spots can I take, some people to, or what can we go try, and things like that. It's just as important as, any other hang you would have, So does that answer the question kind of?
Yeah. And that's a really cool thing, because, since this is the first episode, there's some, we're talking about topics, and it's like, why do we even want to do this? Mm-hmm. And for me, we've already touched on the subject of like education.
Yeah.
I didn't necessarily think I would need an education, to go into, producing and recording in studio. And honestly, I'm also like super grateful that I did, get an education in that. And I really love it. And back in those days, it's over a decade ago, there wasn't really any podcasts to listen to, let's say like musicians or producers that I look up to who would say, oh, I went to school or I didn't.
Yeah.
So at that junction in my life, it's like, I wish somebody would have told me.
Yeah.
And something like this where, it's just two friends hanging out and there's an invite to a restaurant in LA.
Yeah.
I didn't know that I'd be connecting with some world-class musicians,
right,
and so I think just that alone is one of the reasons why we wanted to start this podcast. We're talking about our experiences personally and, hopefully some experiences of our friends, just so that we could share with, the listener, because if there was a roadmap in this music industry, like there are a lot of different careers, I'm pretty sure, and would you agree that a lot of people might be jumping into this industry?
Yeah.
If there was a roadmap.
Yeah, 100%.
If they say 4 years of this and then do an internship here and then you're going to land this job.
Yeah.
But there really isn't.
Right.
And I think what's really cool about podcasts is this is our way of not just giving back, but actually kind of creating a roadmap for anybody who's interested in this.
Yeah.
Because it is such a hush. It's a small industry, but a lot of the times nobody knows how you get in.
Yeah.
Us, especially now with the advent of social media and being able to follow musicians, we're always like, oh, Charlie Puth's on tour. Oh, cool. Oh, did you know so-and-so is on drums with him? Oh, yeah. Oh, but I thought it was so-and-so. Oh, no, because he had to go over to so-and-so.
Yeah.
But there was none of that for us coming up.
Yeah.
Like, we didn't know. Like, if we wanted to know who John Mayer's drummer was, we had to go show up to the Irvine Amphitheater and find out.
Yeah.
And you're looking, from way back, row 100. You're like, who is that? You don't know.
Yeah.
And so there's not that opportunity to kind of, just pick their brain and be like, how did you get to play for John Mayer? So that's one of the reasons why we want to start this podcast, is just to kind of give our insight, experience, and hopefully, give some inspiration and just a little roadmap of how to get into this industry. Because I think there's a lot of people who maybe their dreams or their purpose or passions die because it is scary.
Yeah.
You talked about fear of jumping into school and, things like that. And there is a certain amount of risk and fear involved in this. But, I think for most of the people who jump into this, that risk is definitely well worth it.
Yeah.
And I think if there was some sort of roadmap, even if it means, oh man, I failed, but I tried this or I tried that.
Yeah.
I think it might give a little more hope to somebody who's trying to get into this.
Yeah. And kind of to piggyback off of like the fear topic, and sometimes, in music, you do things based off of what you see as an investment. Not every gig that you're going to do might pay the rate that you feel you deserve.
Right.
But some of those gigs, might be an opportunity that this person is going to hear you, or that person is playing with you, that, this MD or this, artist or this musician that you specifically want to connect with is going to be there. And that's your way in. And it's like, okay, it's not paying anything, or it's an investment or it's a charity or whatever. And it's like, but this person is going to be there. And you sometimes you got to take that risk, to put yourself in a position to like, okay, it didn't generate anything right away or immediately. You got to sometimes think long term, right? I think a lot of things are investments. You have to make, with opportunities that you grant yourself by knowing that somebody else that you want to connect with, and not simply for the fact of, oh, it's because that person has these connections and can do this for me. It's also about, like sometimes, how important character and integrity is. There's a lot of people in the music industry that want to shade you. They're going to backstab you. And I mean, I'd be lying.
You.
I'd be lying to say that it hasn't happened to me. I'd be lying to say if it hasn't happened to Chad, and so the thing we want to share is just our knowledge, like, because you're not going to learn all of these aspects in school. You just won't. You can learn a lot of music theory, but what about your taxes? Your savings, making sure you have enough for a rainy day. Those are all the topics that we want to cover. So what you can expect from us is just sharing that with you, whether you're watching us on YouTube or listening to us on, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. We want to make it as available to you as much as possible. And we're trying to commit to doing this every week, right?
Oh, absolutely.
A weekly thing would be something we definitely want to try. But yeah, man.
So thanks for tuning in to our first episode. Make sure you tune in and for more to come. Make sure you follow us on our socials.
Yeah.
Instagram, TikTok, our YouTube. And feel free to hit us up. We're pretty approachable. You can ask us questions, hit us on our DMs. If you want to work with us, if you want to just grab some food, just hit us up. And continue to follow this podcast. Hopefully we'll be releasing a lot more content on all the platforms.
Yeah, you'll be able to check us out on YouTube, Chad and Chong, or you can also listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music. It'll be basically on every audio platform out there. So appreciate you guys, and tune in for episode 2 coming out next week.